Welcome to Teaching History, elementary version. This time, it's Egypt. The last time we were here was talking about the period from Archaeology through Stonehenge. That ended up being 5 shows with my granddaughter. Well, now we're on Egypt. And Egypt's fun. Egypt's easy. There's tons of material on Egypt. And Egypt took 7 shows. We started out with geography, some background, then we went into writing, talked about the unification, and then the pyramids, toured various parts of Egypt visually. We talked about King Tut, and of course, we did mummies. And Emma loved all of the material, but there's a reason for that. Sherry and I had been to Egypt a couple of years ago, and so she has seen a lot of material on Egypt. We brought some material back for her, so that helped a great deal. But even if you have not had someone who's been to Egypt, for the most part, with the television and everything, children are well aware of Egypt. The pyramids, King Tut, so it's easy. But there's lots of fun things that you can do. Now, in my library, I'm still standing in basically the same position I was the last time, because this is the section where we were. Down below, 2 shelves, about 125 books on the period we were before. Now we're up a level, and this is the Egyptian material, and then we'll get to Mesopotamia. But with Egypt, you can have a good time. You don't have to worry about how am I going to cover any military stuff, and you can just sit back and enjoy it. Plus, there's things you can do if you have museums in your town that are really fun. For example, when my daughters were small, and we went to Chicago to see the Field Museum and other places. Even here in Kansas City, we have a small Egyptian section. Taught them how you can find the pharaohs' names in cartouches. So when we would go to an Egyptian exhibit, I would ask them, can you find any of the cartouches? And they would point to them. And there's a ton of things on hieroglyphics that you can use stencils. You can use all sorts of things. And once I'm done with this introduction, and then I go to the desk, I'll show you some of those. So there are a lot of things. You can go online. You can buy pyramid kits. You can find mummy kits. You can find puzzles with Egypt. You have just a tremendous amount of material on Egypt. So you can do whatever you would like. And of course, the section that I'm going to show you that I did with Emma is the mummification section. Of all of the sections that we went through, she loved mummification and loved the mummies. And I'd asked her mother, my daughter Courtney, I said, you know, when I do the mummies, how much should I show? And she said, well, Emma's really in the doctor stuff. And she's been studying the body, and she likes going to the doctor and playing doctor. And I said, well, that's great. I'll just do what I would normally do, just shorter. And so that's what we ended up doing. So I highly recommend, if you're thinking about doing something with your younger children, Egypt is a really fun one to do. In addition, with all of the material that you can find on YouTube about Egypt, the only thing you have to be careful of is the weird nut stuff out in left field. But you can find documentaries. If you have an advanced child, somebody in later elementary, they would probably enjoy a video that I used to use in class, and it's called This Old Pyramid. And in it, it's a PBS series where they took the people who did the This Old House in New England, carpenters and masons, took them to Egypt and tried to recreate how they put the pyramids together. And it's fascinating because every so often they will bring in one of the gentlemen that has a far-out theory, and they will try it. And in one section, I thought the crew was going to kill him. Not the camera crew, the Egyptians who were working on it, because he couldn't figure out what he wanted them to do. So anyway, Egypt is a lot of fun. And you can literally just talk about a few things. Now, and I usually have on my jacket, but here's my Egyptian t-shirt that I usually wear in class. The other thing is, it's easy to pick Osiris out. As you can see on this, there's somebody seated green. And he's always that somewhat greenish color on the hieroglyphics, on papyrus. And so it's another thing that you can tell the children about and then give them examples and say, where's Osiris in this picture? And it's really funny because there was a time when we were in the Field Museum with my two daughters in their magnificent Egyptian exhibit. And if you've never been there, it's worth the trip to Chicago just to see that. And I said, can you pick out Osiris? And they were pointing out different things. And everybody was like amazed. And it's just really simple. You just need a little practice. So let's leave from where I'm standing here and go behind the desk. And I'll show you some books that you might be interested in. I'll show you some of the things that Emma did. I will go through the mummification section with you. So stay tuned. Well, it's amazing what can happen in moving from about 15 or 20 feet away to behind a desk. What I have on is something we bought in Egypt. This is what you would find most of the men in Egypt who are not wearing Western style clothing wearing. This is a galabeya, a standard run-of-the-mill outfit that most men would wear all sorts of different times. And when we were there, we also bought a fancy set. And here's a picture showing Sherry and I at the symphony in our dress galabeya. And then over here on the other side is a little galabeya that we brought back for Emma so that she would have an Egyptian outfit as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you sources, things that I sent for Emma to use. We'll look at some of the examples, some pictures of her assignments during the 7-week period that we were working on Egypt. Just one lecture for 25 minutes once a week for 7 weeks is what it took to finish up Egypt. And I think we could have stayed there a while longer because she carried some of her crafts over into Mesopotamia. And then we'll look at one of the PowerPoints that I used when I taught the lesson. Now these were all zoomed, and so I have all of the originals for the kids if that's what they want to use them at some other time in the future. So let's look and see what was going on, what Emma did with some of her lessons. Then we'll see the PowerPoint, and then I'll show you some of the sources. Well, here's Emma. She's got on her Egyptian headdress. She actually has an Egyptian dress, but right now she's got her headdress on for a picture, and she also put it on Elmo. Now remember, Emma's about 6.5. She'll be 7 on Christmas Day. And then here is one of her projects. She did this for the Stonehenge period. Put pieces of paper on a wall and she did cave art. Well, we're doing the same thing with Egypt, except she's going to decorate it with hieroglyphics. And so as we learn about hieroglyphics in different parts of Egypt, she then adds to that the whole time period. So we've already had our lesson in this case on Egyptian writing. She's put her name, Emma. She's done some drawings. And you notice that she's put the cartouche around everything she did, in particular her name. But that started out with this picture, where she's writing on papyrus. She's drawing on it, and you see she's put the cartouche around it, and then you see the Egyptian figures. Well, I sent her this. It's called Fun with Hieroglyphics. It comes from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it has rubber stamps. And she did rubber stamping all the time. Now, this is something I had when her mother was her age, and they used that, and it's still available to this day. Then I also sent a couple of things out. One of them is this item I got at the British Museum, which is a little pencil and pad, pencil sharpener in a container that is the Rosetta Stone. And of course I showed pictures of the Rosetta Stone so that she'd get an idea of how we learned how the writing went. And then I also sent out this hieroglyphic alphabet spinner so you could get the letter and it would show the hieroglyphic drawing. So that's what we really ended up doing with the first couple of days, although she did the project with the wall the whole time we were on Egypt. Emma had so much fun with the excavation of the fossils that I found something that she could dig up and excavate for Egypt. It was a little sarcophagus, and when you opened up the sarcophagus, there was a little coffin on the inside of it. And then when you open the coffin, there was a mummy on the inside of it. So that fit perfectly with our mummification process. Usually a couple of days before the lesson, I send Courtney, Emma's mother, a list of the words, and if there's some things she needs to have available for us to do the projects, she'll have them available. So here's all the stuff that I asked her to have for the mummification process. She needed to have some little containers so that she could mummify some of her people. Fisher-Price people, they could be LOL, small LOL dolls, or they could be Lego people. So that's why you see the separation of the dishes. Then they were supposed to have a container of baking soda. And there's the container of baking soda. And then they were supposed to have a box, which was to be the sarcophagus for the person, and some paper to wrap their mummy up. So you see in this picture the box, and she's drawn the picture of the person, and then they used, instead of gauze or anything, they used another piece of paper to wrap the mummy. And then she put the various characters in the baking soda. And then when it was all done and they closed the lid, she used the hieroglyphic stamps to put a name on it. If you notice on the zoom picture, I'm talking about the using of natron to dry the mummies out. And that's the point where they put this character inside the little container and put the baking soda on it. Emma was very good at doing this step by step. When we get to a couple of the other projects, she was so excited she got ahead of the situation. But that's what this is. This picture shows the process that we're going to be using while I'm going through the information and showing pictures on the PowerPoint. And now we can begin the PowerPoint presentation. Here's the very first page, which always has pictures of what we're going to do. Hopefully, pictures of Nani and Bob, which you see. One of them we're standing in front of the step pyramid, and the other one we're getting ready to go down in the King Tut's tomb. And then we have Emma doing her two projects in the corner, and then hieroglyphics that spell out the word Emma. And then we have some pictures of mummies. And then, as I do in every one of these lessons, there's a section where we have the words from the last lesson. And she has a little note card. I read the word off, and then she pronounces it. And then here's our words for this lesson: mummy, natron, sarcophagus, and the other words. Now we come to the review slide. The week before, we talk about the early forms of burials. That's one of the reasons why they have mummification. So here is the pre-dynastic burial where they're buried in the ground, but they're not so deep that the sun doesn't dry them up, because the Egyptians believed you need to have the body preserved. Then here's the mastaba. Well, this mastaba is the one that's in the Field Museum in Chicago, where you access the Egyptian collection, or of course you can always go down the steps in the elevator as well. And this cutaway view shows the problem. When you bury the body so far down on the ground that the sun can't desiccate it, then it begins to rot and deteriorate, and that's a problem. So that's why they began using the mummification process. Then we come to the part about drying the mummies, the use of natron, which for Emma is baking soda. It has the same thing, it draws out moisture. And here's an example of what natron looks like on the right side of the screen, and then the other is a body that is actually being dried the old-fashioned way, with natron gathered up by some of the Egyptologists from outside in the desert. So this is when the little characters that Emma has goes into the container and gets covered with baking soda. The next pictures are of canopic jars, where the organs that the Egyptians saved would be placed. So there's a kind of a medium level set of the canopic jars, and there's some of King Tut's canopic jars. And Emma has a doll with the body parts that are stuck on it, the organ parts that are stuck on it. So at this point, she's pulling them off and setting them aside. Well, next is wrapping. And unfortunately, they couldn't find any gauze at the house, so they had to use paper. So here's some examples of an Egyptian artificial toe that was put on a mummy. And then here is a toe tag. This is so they could separate who was whose mummy, made out of wood. And then here is the character that the scientists were using to dry in a previous picture. Now they're wrapping him with materials. And so at this point, it's time for Emma to start wrapping her mummies. Well, now it's time to put Emma's little mummies in their coffins. So I gave her some examples of what that would look like. So here is some coffin examples from the Louvre, where you have different materials that you can use. And here's one where they show the same type of coffin, but it's in different sizes. And then you have this one where they have the people drawn on the inside of it, relatively reasonable. That's actually made out of cartonnage, which is compressed paper, papyrus. Then we end up with one of the queens and her gold-covered coffin, and then the interior of it on the back side. And then here is another version of it where they have the exterior shot, and then once you take the gold lid off, you have the mummy and its coverings. And when we got to the final picture, which is one of the Ptolemaic mummies, the time of from Alexander the Great through Cleopatra, and then Roman times, frequently they're very simple with just a little painted picture of the person, and they're also put in this very thin cartonnage. Again, it's compressed papyrus and other materials. So at this point, Emma shows me her coffin, and it's a paper box. And I explained to her that she is putting her mummies in cartonnage. And she just laughed, thought that was really funny. So that's the process. We've reached the point where we've now put the mummies in the coffin. Then we get to the sarcophagus. Now, we did not put the mummies in a sarcophagus or their coffins in a sarcophagus, but I showed Emma some examples of what that looked like. So here is a wooden exterior of one with all the hieroglyphics on it, and then there's the interior of another one. And then here is one for a much more wealthy person made out of basalt stone. And then there were a few slides that went with what you would find in a tomb. So here is one of the carving of the Ba bird, which is the creature that escorts the Ka, or the soul, of the individual to the judgment in the afterlife. And then a hieroglyphic of the weighing of the soul. And then you have this one picture of the various Swadabi statues that you'll find in different sizes. These are supposed to, with an incantation, come to life and work for you if you make it to the afterlife. And then here's one that I found in the British Museum that has the incantation on the side, and then it's literally a case of them. So there was always a discussion, did you have to use just one, or was it one and done? And so this gentleman is not taking any chances, he's taking some extras. And then, of course, we have to have a picture of Osiris and his beautiful green coloring and all of his wrappings, the first mummy. Of course, what's mummification if you don't get to see the mummies? So here's a selection of mummies. Now remember, they have recently been moved from the Egyptian Museum in downtown Cairo in this spectacular ceremony and moved to the new giant museum closer to the pyramids. Here's Uni, and Uni is in the Field Museum in Chicago, so you get to see him when you go and visit. The Egyptians believed that as long as your name was pronounced, that you would live forever. So there's usually a little sign that says, please pronounce these names. Now, when I was in the Egyptian Museum to see the other mummies, they would not allow you to take pictures in there, which is fine, and they would not allow you to pronounce their names. I thought that was kind of a jip for them. But anyway, here's Ramses the First, and you'll see in these pictures that there's some significant difference in the outcome of the mummification, and that can vary according to the type of person, how sick he was, period of time, but he's a little on the skinny and stone side. Then here's Ramses III, who's actually the model for the mummy movies. Thutmose III is such a nice, quiet-looking person here, the greatest conqueror in all of Egypt. And then Seti I. And Seti at one time had a mold come up upon him, and they had to take him to France for radiation treatment. And it was interesting because the Egyptians believed that the mummies of the pharaohs should be treated as the living president of Egypt. So they had to do a red carpet and full military thing for him. And then we have Thuya here, the wife of the king Yuya. And you see her hair. And now that is blonde. You don't usually find blondes in Egypt. So she may have come from the Levant region. There is a group of people called the Mitanni which have that. And of course it can be dyed as well, but this looks like the real thing. This is the sarcophagus of Thuya, and then her husband's coffin, of course, is covered in gold. And this is just a small selection of the mummies that they had. I would point out when they did the moving of the mummies from Cairo to the new museum, they were done in order of age. So Senkenere Tau went first, and then the last mummy that was on display went last. And as they came into the museum area, the president of Egypt, President Sisi, alone stood out in front and welcomed them. And then here are a couple of examples of mummified animals. So here we have a mummified crocodile. And then in the Louvre, they had these mummified cats. So here we have them standing up, mummified with the heads out. And then here we have 3 of them in the process of action. It looks like they're mummified moving. And at the end of every PowerPoint presentation that I use with Emma, we go back over the words for the day. So here we have mummy and natron and canopic jars, Osiris, Ka, and Ba. And then I give an example of what the homework is going to be if we're going to do homework. In this case, it's continue to mummify and work on your wall. And we talk about what we're going to do next week. Now, we've already seen Emma working on her wall, and she's done her cartouche and their names, but there was other things that I sent out to her to put on them as well. Here's one of them, which is a Egyptian art, 16 art stickers so that you could apply them. Fun with Egyptian stencil, so that you could make stencils of various Egyptian objects and then color them in. And then another set of stickers on Egyptian life. As I said at the beginning, there is a ton of Egyptian material available online through Amazon and other places. So here's a few of the books that either I have or I picked up for Emma to use in her course. A Kid's Life in Ancient Egypt, which is a nice view of what it looks like for a child growing up in Egypt. A Sea Inside an Egyptian Town, great art. The Ancient Egypt by Eyewitness Books. And when you open it up, there you have actual pictures, and you have maps and charts and all sorts of things. This is obviously for an older child, but visually it's for anyone. So these are some of the books that we utilized. And then here's the one final book. And this one covers a multiple group of topics because it will be in the next unit on Mesopotamia. It's called The Incredible Writing Box. So you open it up and it has a really nice little booklet explaining everything. It has some wax, it has some seals, it has a pencil, it also has a stylus, and then when you go further into it, it has a chart to do translation in cuneiform, in Egyptian hieroglyphics, and Chinese. And then it also has the traceable Egyptian hieroglyphics as well. So it's a really nice object, and I believe this is still available for sale. One final thing, don't forget that Playmobil had a spectacular amount of Egyptian items. I happen to have the pyramid in my possession. I had some smaller ones and I gave them out to the grandchildren a couple of years ago. Well, I hope that this segment of Teaching History Elementary on Egypt gave you some ideas on what you can do in the classroom, what you can do at home, and what you can do to help your children learn more about Egypt. Now, our next section is a lot more difficult, and that is Mesopotamia. And so until that time, thank you very much for watching.